The following program may contain views and opinions which are not necessarily those of the Nine Network or its affiliate stations. It governs what you think. It motivates what you say. It drives everything you do. It's your worldview.
This week on Worldview, the AIDS epidemic. And an Aussie film about old memories and marriage. Good morning, welcome to Worldview. Our special report today is on HIV and AIDS. We discuss the effect of the virus on those who live with it and examine the community's attitude towards AIDS. Also this morning, Michelle Thomas reviews the Australian production Thank God He Met Lizzie. The film is a bittersweet story about broken relationships and regret. And later in the program, Bill Newman looks at overcoming the other great epidemic of our times, loneliness. But right now, we review some of the main events in the news this week. In Canada, international dignitaries from 18 countries met at the Asia-Pacific Economic Forum to discuss open trade in the Pacific. APEC members agreed to further free up markets, somewhat of a surprise outcome given recent turmoil in Asian economies, including the collapse this week of Japanese securities giant Yamaichi. At home, the Federal Senate began debating the government's contentious legislation to amend the Native Title Act. Coalition Senator Ron Boswell was the target of 20 hecklers later thrown out of the gallery. Labor and the Democrats opposed the amendments, leaving the balance of power in the Senate with Tasmanian independent Brian Harradine. Senator Harradine clearly indicated his desire to resolve the matter before Christmas, but signalled the need for changes to the government's plan.
The legislation, as printed, will require amendment, substantial amendment.
Meanwhile, hundreds of cut-out hands were placed on the front lawn of Parliament House in protest to the 10-point plan. Also this week, the funeral of rock musician Michael Hutchence. Mourners gathered in St Andrew's Cathedral in Sydney to remember Hutchence, who apparently committed suicide last weekend. His death awakened concern in the community that those who find themselves in bleak situations will copy the rock star's actions, rather than reaching out beyond themselves for the hope offered in Christ.
We will remember him with love and affection. We will all miss you, Michael. God bless you.
Overseas, disturbing allegations of corruption and violence were levelled against key political figures. In PNG, Prime Minister Bill Skate began legal action against the ABC this week after it broadcast a secret videotape allegedly showing the Prime Minister approving the use of a bribe. And in South Africa, former First Lady Winnie Madikizela-Mandela was accused of the murder of 14-year-old Sowetan schoolboy Stompie Sepe before the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, headed up by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Former supporters of Ms Madikizela-Mandela stated that she stabbed the teenager, recanting their earlier testimonies which had cleared her of wrongdoing.
I saw her killing Stompie. She raised her hand twice.
Ms Madikizela-Mandela is also accused of involvement in the murders and beatings of several other people. Amidst stories of sorrow and sadness, there was some cause for celebration, with the world's only living septuplets growing stronger every day. The Magnificent Seven are expected to be released from hospital early next year. Mrs McCoy spent the last 5 months of her pregnancy on her back. Months of training by the medical team ensured the success of the multiple birth.
4 boys, 3 girls. All healthy?
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad. I am all alone.
After the break, our report on life with AIDS. Tomorrow is World AIDS Day, one of the numerous campaigns and events run in the last decade to highlight the condition of people living with AIDS. Within Australia, there are about 11,000 people affected with the human immunodeficiency virus. They are people who face an uncertain future, and for those who develop AIDS, there are tough issues to face: the reality of death and the fear of being ostracised. Since the first patient was diagnosed with AIDS in New York in 1979, an estimated 30 million people worldwide are now known to be infected with the disease. Acquired immune deficiency syndrome, or AIDS, is a condition spawned from a virus called HIV. It attacks the body's immune system, preventing it from fighting off illness. Infection occurs primarily through the transmission of blood and intimate sexual contact, but can also be passed on from mother to unborn child. With the introduction of blood screening, those now most at risk of contracting AIDS are intravenous drug users, homosexual or bisexual people, and people with multiple sexual partners. Around the world, over 7,500 people develop AIDS each day. The disease is most prevalent in sub-Saharan Africa, where reports suggest that half of all pregnant women are infected with HIV. Currently, the most effective remedies to keep symptoms of AIDS at bay longer are drug cocktails such as AZT and protease inhibitors like Sequinova, but the treatments are costly, up to $25,000 per patient each year. The most recent research into AIDS has produced terrifying results. The virus is modifying its own genetic makeup, developing resistance to any treatment thrown at it. Mamie Long is the author of Positive People, a book recounting some of the experiences of Christians caught up in the HIV/AIDS epidemic. We've asked Ms Long to provide a Christian perspective on responding to people with the virus. To speak with her is Kel Richards.
Mamie Long, is it the case that quite often the discovery of AIDS or being HIV positive is a sort of a double whammy, a double shock? I mean, it means a family discovering that a son or a brother is both gay and HIV positive at the same time, a kind of double impact like that?
Yes, it is, although usually I think families find out first that their son or husband is gay, and later they find out that he's HIV positive, and so some of them have to come to terms with that, and then come to terms with the sickness. Or if they find out he is gay, they then start worrying
that he'll get sick,
about the possibility of getting sick. Yeah.
Right. So which is the bigger shock of the two?
I think for a Christian, probably the homosexuality. It seems to raise, enormous problems, and then which they don't feel are acceptable within their church. Yes.
Maybe one of the interviewees in your book, one of the fathers, says this. Let me read the quote to you. He says, it's a case of love the homosexual, that is, love the person, but hate the morality and the lifestyle. Is that what's involved?
Well, if it's your son, I think the love is stronger. And it's just the way they're living is not the way you would want them to live, and that is painful.
So why did you write this book, Positive People? What's the goal? What was it you wanted to achieve?
Well, the goal is that people will think about the issues, that they'll consider what it is actually like for Christians who are living with problems in their families, that they'll consider how they might actually care for them, that it is possible to offer support even if you aren't happy with you have a problem with homosexuality, but you actually can care for people no matter what their situation.
Now, some people who are HIV positive contracted that infection, that disease, through contaminated blood. How different is it for them than people who contracted it through sexual transmission? I mean, is it just as difficult for them to talk about?
Totally different issues, but still the same difficulty in talking about it, an awareness that it is not a socially acceptable disease. It has different implications for their lifestyle. It affects them enormously. It has implications in their workplace. It has implications for their children, for their relationships, just their general social circle. And so they're completely different set of problems.
But just as hard.
But just as hard.
One of the interviewees in your book suggests that it's especially hard for those people because, by and large, the AIDS support systems have been set up to support gay young men. And if they're not a gay young man, it's particularly difficult for them to find that support, isn't it?
That's true, and in fact a number of people commented when they went to the AIDS ward, not just the clinics, that because they were not part of the gay scene, they were not supported, and they were actually disappointed in that. And for people who are not part of the gay scene, this one man went with his child, and they were apparently very loving and friendly towards them, but he couldn't get his support in that group because they had different issues.
Are we focusing too much on AIDS? Are we making too much of a fuss of AIDS, bearing in mind that other diseases like breast cancer, for example, kill 10 times as many Australians as AIDS?
Well, the amount that the church is focusing on it, no, I don't think so. We're focusing on it very little. It's a subject that's barely raised in churches, and most people would say, well, it's got nothing to do with us until...
But we're not focusing on breast cancer either, which kills 10 times as many people.
No, I don't think breast cancer raises the same spiritual hassles for people. And in fact, if somebody is suffering from breast cancer in their church, they're likely to get a lot of support and care, people visiting them, people caring for the family. You don't have to keep quiet about whether if you've got some sort of cancer. You know, it's perfectly acceptable to have cancer. It's not perfectly acceptable to be HIV positive or AIDS.
Do some family members find it hard to raise those gospel-related questions?
Yes, they do. Most people do, actually. They find it hard to talk about the person's belief in Jesus, particularly when the person has gone away from the Lord and is living a homosexual lifestyle, say. They find it hard to reconcile their belief in the need for repentance and also to talk about spiritual issues.
It must be hard for them to sit at the bedside of a son, a brother, whatever, who is not repenting and not interested in turning back to God, knowing that there's judgment on the other side of death, and unless this loved family member repents, then on the other side of the grave they'll be separated forever. That must be very hard for Christians to deal with.
Yes, it is. It's extremely painful, and I think most parents, families, friends, we all feel that with people whom we know are not in a relationship with Jesus, and it's particularly hard for those who are facing death imminently. Yes, it is hard. Mm-hmm.
Amy Long, many thanks.
If you'd like to respond to today's program, you can do so by phoning free call 1800 64 6494.
After the break, we review Thank God He Met Lizzie. Regret is one of the worst words in the English language. It reminds us of missed opportunities and past mistakes. Hardly the sort of concept to provide an entertaining movie, but that is just what the makers of Thank God He Met Lizzie have produced. The Australian film is about the regret of abandoning relationships when the going gets tough, instead of growing together through them.
Serial monogamy, as it's now known, has become the relationship choice of the 90s. Instead of committing to one person for life, or taking several partners at once, people make a stab at temporary faithfulness, then move on to the greener pastures. This is a less than ideal state of affairs. It's basically a setup for great pain and regret, with grief over one relationship bound to ambush the next one. Thank God He Met Lizzie takes this often ignored downside and gives it a bittersweet squeeze. It tells the story of Guy, a man in his mid-30s who's looking for the perfect woman without much success. Then into his life steps Lizzie, a beautiful, wealthy doctor who he immediately plans to marry. You might think there may have been a few too many wedding movies this year, but I can assure you that this one is a bit different. Rather than being the climax of the action, the wedding night itself becomes the whole film. And instead of a romantic highlight, it develops into the setting for Guy's grief and regret over Jenny, the girl he lived with in his 20s. His relationship with Jenny was vibrant, passionate and chaotic, while Lizzie is cool, calm and pragmatic. The difference is even reflected in the cinematography. His memories of Jenny are saturated in bright colour, while the wedding scenes are bland and formal. The result is a portrait of the deep sorrow caused by fractured relationships. Guy and Jenny broke up because romantic love didn't last. When the going got tough, they didn't know how to hang on. Unsanctioned by marriage vows, uncluttered by children, it was all too easy for them to walk away. But the pain remains.
Oh, good, you've got a teapot. I'll throw mine away.
No, I was going to throw mine away anyway. You keep yours.
No, I like this one.
I'm definitely throwing it away. It's very old.
No, this one's better.
Not that important. Just a material thing.
Nothing wrong with material things, darling. They outlast us.
That's the worst thing about them.
Where did you get it, anyway?
Just ended up with it, really.
So you found it?
No.
What, so you stole it?
No. It's just that I didn't buy it.
Well, who bought it?
Jenny Follett bought it.
Who's Jenny Follett?
Oh, she's just,
Sorry?
I used to go out with her.
Well, why have you got a teapot? Did she bring it along on a date? Did you live with her? Oh, that's okay. Well, I've lived with a couple of men. Just makes our marriage all the more special, don't you think?
Yes, I do think.
What did you do that for?
Because I don't want it.
Guy, if you hadn't resolved this...
Of course it's resolved. It's resolved. It was years ago. I wouldn't even know where to find her. I love you. Do you understand?
Filtered all through the film is the despair left behind by shallow relationships. Underlying it is the implication that real love and commitment are unattainable. The film left me feeling overwhelmingly relieved to know the unshakable love of God, no matter how hard it can be to live out. It's a reminder of how much better His way is and how miserable we are when we don't live the way we're created to live. Actors of the moment Kate Blanchett, who plays Lizzie, and Frances O'Connor, who's a sparkling Jenny, play their parts brilliantly, while Richard Roxburgh gets the fumbling, foolish Guy, a part that could have been hammed up, just right. Despite its mournful subject matter, Thank God He Met Lizzie is hardly bleak. It has a wryly observed humour and some very funny minor roles. And Jenny's character is so full of fun, the film couldn't help but reflect it. Yet it's largely the kind of humour which is tinged with nostalgia, where if you don't laugh, you'd weep for the loss of it. Guy, it seems, was laughing just a little too late. I give it 8 out of 10.
Thanks, Michelle. After the break, Bill Newman looks at loneliness. Mother Teresa once said that loneliness is the greatest poverty of the soul. All of us have a need to belong, and life can become very lonely when we feel that no one understands us or cares for our troubles. Loneliness has assumed almost epidemic proportions in our society as work pressures, family breakups, or even a change in circumstances contribute to isolation.
A famous doctor said one time, mankind's biggest problem is simply loneliness. So we all get lonely. I get lonely, you get lonely. People in life get so lonely in life. So many books have been written about loneliness and so many songs. Who could ever forget Roy Orbison's song, Only the Lonely Know the Way I Feel Tonight? So we all get lonely. Now, what are some of the basic causes of loneliness? Well, the first is a feeling that we don't belong. And that's why there's so many clubs in Australia today. We want to belong to something. The second reason is that nobody really understands me as a person. If I was to give you a piece of paper and a pencil, how many people could you write down that really know you as a person, how you think and how you feel? You see, we all get basically lonely in life. The roots of loneliness are within each one of us. Sometimes a great personal loss brings an overwhelming sense of isolation. A loved one dies, a romance breaks up, a job is lost, or a grown child leaves home. And the result is a feeling that we are living in emotional solitary confinement. There are different kinds of loneliness. There's the loneliness of the foreigner when someone comes to our shores and they've left their family and friends behind. They're desperately lonely, and oftentimes they need our help and encouragement. And then too, there's the loneliness of selfishness when we just live for ourselves and we're not worried about anybody else. People like that are often very, very lonely. There's the loneliness of solitude, and that's why a lot of people take to drugs and alcohol, because basically they're lonely inside. There's the loneliness of society. That's why a lot of people commit suicide, because they're very, very lonely and they think that nobody really cares about them. There's the loneliness too of suffering. How many people do you and I know in hospitals that are suffering right now and they never get a visitor? They are desperately lonely. But then too, there's the loneliness of sorrow. I doubt whether there be any of us that haven't really experienced the loss of a loved one, and we get desperately lonely when we lose that person. I remember when I lost my father, and it was one of the loneliest times in my life, and I cried out because I was just so desperately lonely. So everybody in society, at some time or other, we all get lonely. In a recent university report, they gave the world's loneliest people. Listen to them in order. Firstly, university students. Secondly, the divorced. Thirdly, welfare recipients. 4, single mothers. 5, rural students. 6, housewives. And 7, the elderly, in that order. You see, we can be lonely in a crowd. There's another kind of loneliness that Jesus Christ himself experienced. The crowds left him. His disciples forsook him and fled. And on the cross, nailed to that wooden cross, he screamed out these words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" God in heaven had turned his back on his only son. What was the reason? Because Jesus Christ on the cross was taking the penalty and the punishment for the sins of the whole world, my sin and yours, so that you and I may be able to come back to God. You see, there's the loneliness of our own decision. Only we can make that decision personally to ask Jesus Christ into our life. And once we do it, we will never be lonely again, because he says, I'll stay closer than a brother. Make sure that you've got Jesus Christ in your life.
Our 1-800 number is designed to be your link back to us. Via the phone, you can make contact with someone who can talk to you about your concerns. When you ring, your call will be taken by a volunteer who's been trained to help. While we may not have all the answers at our fingertips, we will try to put you in contact with someone who does. If you agree, we can take your details and organise for someone in your area to take you through a course called Christianity Explained. There's no cost involved, and you're not put on a mailing list or asked for money at any stage. If you do have questions about Christianity, then don't ignore them. Find out some answers. Call 1-800-646494 and have Christianity Explained.
Well, that's all from the Worldview team this week. I hope you'll join us again next Sunday morning as we examine the values that form our worldview. I look forward to seeing you then.